The Atlantic Ocean stretches endlessly, a vast, merciless expanse of blue. In 1981, Stephen Callahan, a 29-year-old sailor and naval architect, set out alone aboard his small sloop, Napoleon Solo. Just 21 feet long, the boat was modest, but it was his portal to adventure, independence, and mastery over the open sea. Callahan had prepared meticulously, packing provisions, spare parts, and his knowledge of survival into every inch of the vessel. The first few days were exhilarating. The Canary Islands receded into the horizon as the wind carried him forward. The waves rose and fell rhythmically, sunlight sparkling like fragments of glass on the sea. Callahan relished the solitude, the feeling of total freedom that only comes when the horizon is limitless. Callahan sailed with optimism. His routine was precise. Checking sails, measuring wind, maintaining course. The ocean seemed friendly, even playful. Dolphins occasionally surfaced beside him, and gulls circled overhead, offering the illusion of companionship. Each morning he logged his observations, wind speed, current direction, and sea life sightings. His body was full of energy, his mind alert, ready for challenges. On the third day, the sea shifted from calm to ominous. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind intensified. Rain lashed against Napoleon Solo, turning the deck slick. Callahan fought to maintain control, reefing sails, securing loose gear. The storm tested him physically and mentally, but he navigated it successfully. By nightfall, the sky cleared, leaving a glittering canopy of stars, a reminder of the ocean's dual nature, beauty and terror intertwined. Disaster struck on the sixth day. Callahan was asleep in his small cabin when a violent impact shook the boat. Water surged in immediately. The collision, possibly with a whale or floating debris, tore through Napoleon Solo's hull. Panic flashed through him, but years of experience kicked in. He scrambled into the water, deploying his 6-foot inflatable life raft, salvaging what he could: a survival kit, a spear gun, a few personal items. The sailboat disappeared beneath the waves within minutes, leaving him alone on a fragile raft in the vast Atlantic. The wind, once a companion, now threatened to capsize him. Night fell, and the stars above seemed impossibly distant. He realized survival would depend on ingenuity, patience, and sheer willpower. The early nights were terrifying. Alone on a raft that moved with every swell, Callahan felt the ocean's full weight. He set up the survival gear, inflated sections of the raft, patched minor leaks, and tested the solar still. Fresh water was scarce. Every drop mattered. He rationed carefully, drinking only when necessary. Food became the next priority. The ocean teemed with life, but capturing it was harder than anticipated. Callahan fashioned makeshift fishing lines and learned to read the birds, dolphins, and the behavior of fish to find sustenance. Nights were cold. Saltwater sores formed on his body. Every wave threatened to overturn his fragile vessel, but he endured. By the 10th day, Callahan had begun adapting. Routine was survival. He rotated tasks, maintaining the raft, checking water levels, attempting to fish, and recording daily observations. His body was still strong, but exposure to the sun, wind, and salt began to leave marks. Blisters and sores appeared, small yet painful reminders of the struggle. He started to notice patterns in the ocean. Currents carried him in predictable directions. Birds indicated nearby fish schools. Sharks circled, testing his courage and patience. Mental resilience became as important as physical endurance. Each day was a balance between hope and despair, action and rest, observation and instinct. By day 10, Stephen Callahan had transitioned from an enthusiastic sailor to a survivor at sea. The first storm, the sinking, and the initial days on the raft had tested him in ways he could never have imagined. The Atlantic was no longer a playground. It was a vast, indifferent adversary, and yet he endured, fueled by skill, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will. The first 10 days had tested Stephen Callahan's body and mind, but the true challenge was only beginning. The Atlantic was vast, empty, and indifferent, offering no mercy to those who faltered. Alone on his fragile raft, Callahan now faced the relentless struggle to sustain life in an environment designed to strip it away. Even with the Solar still producing small amounts of fresh water, Callahan quickly realized it was not enough. Each morning he rationed his water carefully, taking measured sips to survive the day. His lips cracked, his throat burned, and fatigue set in earlier than before. He began tracking his fluid intake meticulously, adjusting for temperature, wind, and activity level. The sun was merciless. By midday, the ocean surface shimmered, reflecting heat onto his exposed skin. Salt sores multiplied, and his back ached from hours of crouching in the raft. Despite the physical discomfort, Callahan forced himself to remain alert, scanning the horizon for birds, fish, or distant ships. Callahan quickly discovered that the ocean itself was both enemy and ally. He observed seabirds diving, dolphins chasing fish, and the subtle changes in water color. Using these clues, he learned where to fish and what to target. With a small spear gun, he began catching triggerfish and dorados. Every successful catch was a small victory. Every failure, a test of patience. He learned to preserve fish on the raft, keeping them shaded from the sun and using seawater to rinse them. Each meal restored some energy, but he had to balance effort with energy conservation. Every movement burned precious calories. Sharks began circling the raft. Not immediately aggressive, they were constant reminders of the ocean's dangers. Callahan learned to stay calm and minimize movement, understanding that panic could provoke them. He occasionally used scraps of fish to distract them, but every approach of a fin brought anxiety. The psychological strain of knowing that predators lurked beneath every swell weighed heavily. Nighttime was worse. Shadows in the dark water seemed larger than life, and every splash could be a shark or a wave. Isolation began to take its toll. Callahan spoke aloud to himself, drew diagrams, and kept a log of daily activities to maintain sanity. He reflected on his life, imagining loved ones, recalling lessons from his childhood, and mentally rehearsing survival strategies. The mind, he realized, could be either the greatest ally or the fiercest enemy. Hallucinations occasionally appeared. Flashes of distant islands, imaginary voices, phantom ships. But Callahan disciplined himself to distinguish reality from the mind's tricks. He called this his, quote, mental vigilance, a daily ritual as essential as food and water. Another storm approached without warning. The wind whipped across the ocean, turning waves into mountains of water. Callahan secured every line and patch, bracing the raft with his body as the ocean tossed him violently. Water splashed over the edges, drenching him and testing his limited supplies. For hours he endured. The storm eventually passed, leaving him shaken but alive. He patched tears in the raft, double-checked the Solar still, and reaffirmed his commitment to survival. Each storm was a lesson in patience and vigilance, each escape a reminder that the ocean gives no guarantees. By the 20th day, a fragile rhythm had emerged. Each day included checking the raft, repairing minor leaks, catching fish, managing water, observing birds and currents, and mental exercises to ward off despair. Callahan began noticing subtle patterns. Currents shifted predictably, birds indicated feeding grounds, and even clouds hinted at approaching weather. His body was beginning to show signs of wear, blisters, sunburn, and minor cuts, but he compensated with careful movement and vigilance. Despite the hardships, hope persisted, the mental thread keeping him tethered to life. By day 20, Stephen Callahan was no longer merely surviving, he was adapting. He had learned to read the ocean, hunt, conserve water, and maintain mental focus under extreme isolation. Sharks, storms, and sunburned skin were daily adversaries, yet each challenge strengthened his determination. The next 50-plus days would push him further than he had ever imagined, testing every skill, every ounce of resolve against the relentless Atlantic. By the third week adrift, Stephen Callahan's world had shrunk to the 6-foot raft, the endless waves, and the horizon that seemed both infinite and isolating. Physical exhaustion and mental strain intensified, and the Atlantic became a harsh teacher, demanding endurance, ingenuity, and resilience. After nearly 3 weeks at sea, Callahan's initial fish catches began to dwindle. The easy prey had been captured, and he needed to develop new strategies. Observing the behavior of seabirds became critical. Flocks indicated feeding fish below the surface, guiding his hunting efforts. He experimented with different techniques, dragging lines behind the raft, using leftover fish as bait, and adjusting spear gun tactics. Every successful catch was celebrated as a small victory, every miss, a reminder that failure could be fatal. The scarcity of food was not only physical but psychological. Hunger gnawed at his willpower, and each day required careful rationing and planning. He also began to conserve energy, limiting unnecessary movements to preserve calories. Storms returned unpredictably. Waves slammed against the raft, sometimes drenching him entirely, sometimes slamming the raft into sharp swells. Callahan braced against the motion, patching leaks and bailing water continuously. At night, he tied himself with a rope to avoid being thrown overboard. Sleep was fragmented. He learned to rest in short intervals, always aware that a rogue wave could capsize him at any moment. The ocean seemed alive, an indifferent predator, and every movement required caution. From the raft, Callahan spotted ships in the distance on several occasions. Each time, he fired flares and waved reflective panels. His heart leaped with hope, only to sink as none of the ships noticed him. These moments were psychologically devastating. He documented them carefully in his log, noting direction, time, and position, trying to maintain a sense of control over a situation that was mostly uncontrollable. The missed rescues reinforced the stark reality. He was alone, dependent entirely on his own skills and wits. Each passing day without contact increased both anxiety and determination. Water continued to be the most critical resource. The Solar still produced minimal amounts, barely enough to keep him alive. Callahan became meticulous in monitoring hydration, measuring intake, observing urine color, and pacing activity to prevent excessive fluid loss. Dehydration took a toll. Headaches, dizziness, dry mouth, and fatigue became constant companions. Yet his mind remained sharp, analyzing currents, weather patterns, and bird activity. He realized mental acuity might be more important than physical strength, especially when fishing or repairing the raft. Callahan innovated new ways to catch fish, often combining patience with observation. He crafted lures from fish scraps, experimented with depth and timing, and learned to predict schools of fish based on seabird behavior. At the same time, the raft was deteriorating. Constant exposure to sun, wind, and waves caused seams to weaken. He patched leaks, reinforced the floor with salvaged material, and improvised flotation support. Survival became a combination of engineering and instinct. As he drifted further from land, Callahan felt the full weight of isolation. The endless horizon offered no landmarks, no sign of rescue, and no comfort. He spoke to himself, sang softly, and kept mental routines to avoid succumbing to despair. Even minor events became significant. A jumping dolphin, a small bird landing on the raft, or a school of fish near the surface could lift his spirits. Callahan began to see the ocean as a teacher. Every challenge carried a lesson. Every success reinforced his will to survive. By day 40, Stephen Callahan had endured nearly 6 weeks alone at sea. His body was fatigued, sunburned, and blistered, but his mind remained alert and disciplined. He had learned to hunt, repair, ration water, and maintain hope despite missed opportunities for rescue. The Atlantic had tested every skill and ounce of resolve. What lay ahead, the next 36 days, would push him to the brink of human endurance, where ingenuity, resilience, and stubborn determination would determine life or death. By the 41st day adrift, Stephen Callahan's body had become a fragile instrument of survival. Skin sunburned and salt-scorched, muscles sore and exhausted, his raft worn and leaking, every day was a test of willpower. Yet, despite the unrelenting challenges, he continued to adapt, innovate, and endure. Callahan awoke each day with pain as his constant companion. Blisters, salt sores, and chafing made even the simplest movements difficult. Fatigue was no longer occasional, it was relentless. He rationed his strength carefully, moving only when necessary, patching the raft, fishing, collecting water, or adjusting sails. His survival depended on constant vigilance. The Atlantic's surface might appear calm, but beneath it lurked dangers, sharks, strong currents, and sudden storms. Callahan learned to read subtle changes in wind, wave patterns, and sky color to anticipate trouble. A sudden storm battered the fragile raft, testing every repair and seam. Waves tossed him violently. The wind threatened to overturn him at any moment. Callahan fought to maintain his balance while reinforcing patched areas and bailing water. This storm lasted hours, leaving him soaked, exhausted, and shivering. Yet each survival lesson was etched into his mind. Never underestimate the ocean and always prepare for the unexpected. Sharks remained a constant presence. Callahan learned to stay calm, moving slowly and avoiding sudden actions. He occasionally fed them scraps of fish, keeping them at a safe distance while also conserving his food supply. Seabirds continued to be guides. By observing their patterns, Callahan located fish-rich waters. He experimented with different lures, adjusting depth and timing. The ocean became a classroom, and every small success reinforced his confidence and hope. The sun scorched relentlessly. Callahan's water rations were dangerously low. Every sip had to be measured. His body screamed for more. Heat exhaustion set in. Dizziness, nausea, and intense fatigue became daily companions. He relied on mental discipline, focusing on breathing, conserving energy, and creating a daily routine. The mind became a lifeline. Small tasks, checking water, inspecting the raft, catching fish, provided structure and purpose. Isolation intensified. Callahan began experiencing hallucinations, phantom voices, imagined islands, fleeting visions of ships. He disciplined himself to distinguish reality from illusion, documenting everything in his log. Mental resilience became the most critical skill. He recited routines aloud, sang, and talked to imagined companions. These rituals maintained his sanity, providing psychological scaffolding that was as vital as food or water. The raft, constantly battered by the waves, was deteriorating. Callahan patched seams repeatedly, reinforced weak spots, and jerry-rigged flotation devices to keep it afloat. Each repair was a test of ingenuity and endurance. Fish remained scarce but sufficient to maintain minimal nutrition. Water from the Solo still continued to sustain him, though at the edge of survival. Every day he reminded himself, hope is as vital as air, water, and food. By day 60, Stephen Callahan had endured 2 months of near-constant survival stress. His body was frail, his raft fragile, yet his mind remained focused. The Atlantic had pushed him to the edge of human endurance, testing every skill and every ounce of willpower. What remained was the final grueling stretch, days 61 to 76, where the raft would begin to fail more critically, the body would reach its physical limit, and rescue would finally appear on the horizon. By day 61, Stephen Callahan had been adrift for over 2 months. The Atlantic was no longer just a vast expanse of water. It was a relentless test of every skill, every ounce of endurance, and every shred of hope he possessed. His raft, patched countless times, creaked with each wave. His body was frail, sunburned, blistered, and raw from salt and exposure. Yet the human spirit can endure beyond what seems possible. The raft was failing, seams tore under the pressure of waves, leaks increased. Callahan worked tirelessly, using whatever salvaged materials he had left, plastic sheeting, fishing line, even scraps of his clothes, to patch holes and reinforce flotation. Physical exhaustion was relentless. Each movement, even adjusting his position, felt monumental. Sunlight and heat left him parched. His water ration barely sustained him. Yet every patch, every effort to stabilize the raft was a lifeline. The raft was all that stood between him and the merciless ocean. Food had become increasingly scarce. Callahan's hunting had to be more precise. He refined his fishing strategy, tracking bird movements, adjusting lure depths, and timing his efforts to conserve energy. Even small catches were critical, and he rationed every bite. Mental focus became a survival tool. He documented everything, from fish behavior to wind patterns, keeping his mind engaged and away from despair. Each day was a battle to maintain clarity, conserve strength, and persevere. Callahan's body approached its limit. Dehydration, malnutrition, and exposure caused dizziness, hallucinations, and intense fatigue. He imagined islands, phantom ships, and voices, forcing himself to distinguish illusion from reality. Every movement required immense effort. Yet he clung to the knowledge that survival depended on small actions performed consistently. Patching the raft, catching fish, conserving water, maintaining mental discipline. Hope was the fuel sustaining his will to live. After more than 10 weeks adrift, Callahan finally glimpsed signs of human activity. Distant fishing boats near the Caribbean. His heart raced. He fired flares and waved mirrors, signaling desperately. The hours passed agonizingly. The ship seemed to move slowly, sometimes vanishing behind waves or clouds. The hope of imminent rescue reinvigorated him, yet he remained cautious. The ocean had taught him that overconfidence could be deadly. He continued rationing water, repairing the raft, and monitoring the behavior of sharks circling nearby. Finally, near the island of Marie-Galante, a group of fishermen spotted him. Emaciated, sunburned, and exhausted, Callahan was pulled aboard. His raft, barely afloat, had carried him through 76 days of relentless survival. Medical personnel were astonished by his endurance. He had lost nearly a third of his body weight, and his body bore the scars of sun, salt, and fatigue, yet his mind remained remarkably clear. He had survived the impossible, 76 days alone in the Atlantic. Stephen Callahan's ordeal became legendary. He later chronicled it in his book, Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea, a testament to human endurance, ingenuity, and the power of hope. His story has inspired sailors, survivalists, and adventurers worldwide. He reflected that survival was not only about physical skill but about mental resilience, observation, and persistence. Each day at sea reinforced that human beings could endure far more than they imagined when necessity demanded it. For 76 days, Stephen Callahan drifted alone on the Atlantic, facing storms, sharks, hunger, dehydration, and isolation. His survival was a combination of skill, observation, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to live. This story reminds us of the fragility of life, the power of hope, and the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and follow for more incredible survival stories and real-life adventures.